On that Tuesday morning, more than 2,600 people died at the World Trade Center, 125 died at the Pentagon, and 256 died on the planes that crashed. But thousands more lives were saved by the daring and selfless deeds of America's public safety professionals. Your presence here today is a wonderful show of respect and remembrance for all of the victims of September 11, and in particular for the 72 fallen heroes we honor and remember today, along with the families they left behind. Well, unfortunately, once again, we had a rainy day for one of our ceremonies of remembrance, but, you know, as one of our guests said to me afterwards, she said, you know, it's probably appropriate that we're a little uncomfortable here today because of what happened on 9/11. It kind of reminds us a little bit about what people went through that day, the suffering and the great service, the great sacrifice. And I think sometimes we all get a little complacent. We forget. And we take law enforcement for granted. We take what happened on 9/11 a little bit for granted. And the farther we get removed from it. Today, the 10th anniversary especially, I think it really reminded us of what happened that day. It brought all of us back to that moment in time when we saw those towers collapse and when we realized that 72 law enforcement officers had died in law enforcement service that day.
That was the largest line of duty deaths that day for law enforcement?
9/11 was the deadliest day in law enforcement history by far. The earlier incident that had that notorious distinction was a bomb incident in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I think it was back in 1917. 9 officers leaving a meeting. A bomb had been brought into the station house unbeknownst to them in a paper bag. And before anybody could investigate, it exploded, killing those 9. So now we've lost 72 on 9/11, just unparalleled in law enforcement history.
Understand all the names are on certain panels?
We actually, which is a bit unique because normally we display our names here randomly. They are in no particular order. However, because of the request from the departments involved and from the family members, they wanted those names to be put side by side along the memorial walls. And I think symbolically that's very appropriate because they died serving side by side, and now they'll be forever remembered along, starting at panel 9W through panel 22W on line 23 of the memorial, all 72 names in order.
Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleam?
Well, I understand there's a banner over there. Will that be put up, or is it along the walk and it'll stay where it is?
A banner on the memorial walls?
Yes.
Yes, anything left here at the memorial is collected by our staff and very appropriately and properly cared for, and hopefully ultimately displayed in the National Law Enforcement Museum that's now underway across the street. Still a couple years away from opening. Got a lot of construction work ahead of us, a lot of challenges because it's an underground facility, but it's one of the most exciting architectural works that I think people will ever see. And it's just, there's light at the end of the tunnel. That museum has a lot of content that'll be related to 9/11, by the way. In the officer story section, we'll have interviews with the officers who served on 9/11, what they experienced, what they saw that day. In the Hall of Remembrance, obviously, we'll be telling the stories of the men and women who died, the 72 fallen heroes from 9/11. And we'll have a time capsule, a history time capsule, that will be devoted to what happened on 9/11 and the aftermath. And I think all of those will be very poignant reminders of that what I call the darkest day and the brightest day in law enforcement history, 9/11.
It's an honor to stand with you once again today and to join you in paying tribute to the 72 brave law enforcement officers who on September the 11th, 2001, made the ultimate sacrifice in the line of duty. Now, especially this year, as we mark the 10th anniversary of the deadliest terror attack ever carried out against the United States of America, it is fitting that we take time not only to reflect on the devastation that we witnessed in New York City, in Arlington, Virginia, and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, but also to remember the heroes who were killed fulfilling the sacred responsibility that our nation's law enforcement officers willingly and courageously accept.
Yesterday, coming down on the train from New Jersey, I was reflecting how it's changed in 10 years in some ways, in my own mind. Those 37 people are forever locked in time, in some ways forever young. And what left behind was their families, mothers and fathers, wives, husbands, and children. And for 10 years, like all survivors, they served a loss that could never be felt.
My role was as a commanding officer of LaGuardia. I responded to the World Trade Center as the Port Authority Police did on a mobilization when the first plane went into the North Tower. And I got there and took part in some of the rescue and recovery operations. And when just before the South Tower came down, and lived through the collapse of the South and North Tower, and worked with the recovery and rescue operations through the afternoon. And I was designated the rescue and recovery operations point person charge at the World Trade Center.
I understand we lost 72 law enforcement officers that day.
Yes, 37 of them having been Port Authority Police, which included our Superintendent of Police Fred Marone, and we lost chiefs, we lost inspectors, captain, lieutenant, sergeants, and police officers. 37 was approximately 4% of the police department.
So I guess you've seen a lot of changes in the decade since?
Yes, law enforcement is always adapting to meet the risk, and that's what's really changed, the risk assessment. That what was done prior to 9/11 is much more better communications between the intelligence community, through the military, coming down to law enforcement, and all the way up through law enforcement, all the way up to the intelligence community. That's greatly improved. Also, the radio communications, the resources have been provided to better the equipment that we use. So,
I think this was a pretty fitting tribute today here at Law Enforcement Memorial.
Absolutely. It's just a place that it brings you to the realization of the price that it costs to keep public safety in this country. Nothing is free, and there's a cost, and this is the ultimate cost.
I guess you'll be heading up to New York for ceremonies?
Yes, taking part with the Port Authority services on a Sunday afternoon.
Okay, thanks a lot. Appreciate your time.
From the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, Richard J. Wadagna. From the New York Police Department, John B. Codley. Michael Curtin. John Delara. Vincent G. Dons. Jerome M. Dominguez. Stephen P. Driscoll. Mark Ellis. Robert Fazio. Rodney C. Gillis. Ronald Buffer.
Continuing from the New York City Police Department,